Hello everybody, my name is Scootyman Gaming, and today we are going to actually be reading the Creepypasta, Toby, on Wattpad, since I couldn't find the Creepypasta wiki, and I have my friend, Aiden here. Say hello.
Hello.
He was actually...
What is up?
Oh, what?
No, I just said what is up. Didn't mean to interrupt you.
Okay, so, he actually had a YouTube channel. He stopped posting because he had some problems with the like lagging and stuff. So yeah, I'm bringing his channel back to light. I'm helping bring his channel back to light. I'm not sure it's gonna work, but anyway, this creepypasta on Wattpad was reposted by Crimson Chaos 13, and the original creepypasta was made by Toby. The original creepypasta was made by Castaway. I think that's right. But anyway, here we go. I'll be leaving a link in the description for this. But the long road home seemed to go on and on. The road continued to outstretch in front of the vehicle endlessly. The light that shone through the branches of the tall green trees danced across the window in random patterns, every once in a while, obnoxiously shining in your eyes. The surrounding was full of deep green trees forming a forest around the road. The only sound was the sound of the car's engine as it traveled down the path. It was peaceful and let off a serene feeling. Although the ride seemed like a nice one, it lacked from every form of nice to both passengers. The middle-aged woman behind the steering wheel had a neat, short brown hair that fit her complexion quite well. She wore a green V-neck t-shirt and a pair of blue jeans. Diamond stud earrings decorated each of her ears, which partially showed from behind her haircut. She had deep green eyes, which were brought out by her shirt, and the lighting seemed to make them more noticeable. There wasn't much significance to her appearance. She just looked like any old average mother that you'd see on TV shows and such. But one thing that made sure her differ from those average mothers was that she had the dark bags under her eyes. Her facial expression was gloomy and sad, although she generally looked like one who smiled a lot. She would sniffle every once in a while and occasionally glance back in the rearview mirror to look back at her son in the back seat, who was hunched over partially, his arms held tight around his chest and his head pressed against the cold window. The boy lacked any normal appearance. Anyone could blandly see that there was something wrong with him. His messy brown hair went in every which way, and his pale, almost gray skin was lit up by luminescent lighting. His eyes were dark. Unlike his mother's, he wore a white t-shirt and scrub pants that had been provided to him by the hospital. The clothes he had worn before were so shredded and blood-stained, they weren't even wearable anymore. And Aiden, I want you to pick off here.
Oh, I was like reading all the way ahead. I almost finished actually. Where were you?
Wearable anymore.
Wearable anymore. Where
Sorry
was
guys,
that?
technical difficulties.
Here we are. The right side of his face bared a few cuts along with his split eyebrow. His right arm was bandaged up all the way to his shoulder, which had been shredded when his right side had hit the shattered glass. His injuries appeared to be painful when really he couldn't feel a thing. He never could feel a thing. That was just one of the glories about him. One of the many challenges he had faced growing up was growing up with the rare disease that caused him to be completely numb towards any form of pain. Never before had he felt himself get hurt. He could have lost an arm and felt nothing at all. That and another major disorder he had faced was the one deemed in many insulting nicknames. In the short time he actually went to grade school, before he was moved to homeschooling, was his Tourette syndrome, which caused him to tick and twitch in ways that he could never control. He would crack his neck uncontrollably and twitch every once in a while. Kids would tease him and call him Ticci Toby and mock him with exaggerated twitching and laughing. It got so bad he turned to homeschooling. It was too hard for him to be in a common learning environment with seemingly every kid poking, or more like stabbing, fun at him. Toby stared blankly out the window. His face was empty of any depictable emotion. Every few minutes, his shoulder, arm, or foot would twitch. Every bump that car tires hit made his stomach turn. Toby Rogers was the boy's name, and the last time Toby remembered riding a car was when it crashed. You can go. Continue.
That's all he thought about. Unconsciously replaying everything he had remembered before he blacked out, over and over again. Toby had been the lucky one, and his sister hadn't been so lucky. When the thought of his older sister came, he couldn't help but let his eyes begin to tear up. Horrible memories would play in his mind. Her screaming that had been cut off while the front car was smashed in. It all went blank for a moment before Toby opened his eyes to see his sister's body. Her forehead pierced with glass shards. Her hips and legs were crushed under the force of the steering wheel. Her torso pushed in from the late inflated airbag. This was the last thing she'd ever seen of his dear old sister. The road home continued on for what seemed like forever. It took so long to get home due to his mother wanting to avoid passing the site of the crash. The surroundings gave into his familiar neighborhood. They had both been more than ready to get out of the car and step back into their own. It was an older neighborhood. Quaint little houses all next to each other. Yeah. That car drove in front of a little blue house. White window panes. Go ahead.
Hold on, it has to use my Google Plus for me to continue reading. I didn't look at the bottom. I thought I was almost done. Apparently I was not.
Oh, come on, don't lag now. Just connect, Google.
No, sorry, technical difficulties. Okay.
I love my toaster of a computer.
Sorry.
$1,200 on toast, my favorite. Alrighty, come on now.
Sorry guys for the technical difficulties. I will continue reading until he fixes it.
Yeah, please. This thing's not even...
Okay. They both quickly noticed the old vehicle was parked in front of the house, and the familiar figure who stood out in the driveway. Toby felt automatic anger and frustration take over him at the sight of his father who wasn't there. His mother pulled the car up in the driveway beside him, turning off the engine, preparing to step out and face her husband. "Why is he here?" Toby said quietly as he looked back at his mother, who reached to open the car door. "He's your father, Toby. He's here because he wants to see you," his mother responded with a monotone voice, trying to sound less shaky. "Yet he couldn't have driven up to the hospital to see Lyra before she died?" Toby narrowed his eyes out to the window. "He was drunk that night, honey. He couldn't drive." "Yeah, when he's not. Or when is he not?" Toby pushed open the door before his mother stumbled out into the driveway where he met his father's gaze before looking down at his feet with his stern expression. His mother stepped out of the car. Oh my god, I'm terrible at reading today. His mother stepped out behind him and met her husband's eyes before walking around the car. "Oh, hi!" Before walking around the car, his father opened up his arms. Sorry guys, brief intermission. His mother stepped out behind him and met her husband's eyes before walking around the car. His father opened up his arms, expecting a hug from his wife. But she walked past him and put her arm around Toby's shoulder and influenced him to begin coming inside. "Connie," her husband began to say under a raspy voice. "What no welcome hug home, huh?" She ignored her husband's obnoxious words and walked past him with her son under her arm. "Hey, he's 16. He can walk by himself." His father began to follow them in. "He's 17. Connie glared back at him before opening the door into the house and stepping inside. "No, I'm 16. I can walk by myself," Toby said sarcastically and glared back at his father before stumbling up the small staircase and turning into his room. While he slammed the door violently. The little room didn't have much paint in it. Just a small bed, a dresser, a window, and his walls had a few framed pictures of his family, back when they were a family. "Are you there? Did you fix it?" Did you fix it?
Sorry, yeah, I fixed it. I got in. I just had to go get something out to eat, and my cat opened my front door. All right, where are you at the before his father?
No, I was at his little room. Didn't have much in it, just a small bed, a dresser, a window, and his walls had a few framed pictures.
Oh, so the paragraph after that.
Yeah.
All right. So before his father, this is what I was. All right.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
All right.
Well, no, it was actually on before his father.
All right. I got it. Creepy voice. You have music on, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Before his father became an alcoholic, he acted violently towards the rest of his family. Toby remembered when he was arguing with his mother and he grabbed her by the hair and shoved her to the floor. And when Lyra had tried to break it up, he pushed her and she hit her back on the corner of the kitchen counter. Toby could never forgive him what he did to his mother and sister. Never in a million years. Toby didn't care how much his father beat him down. He couldn't feel it anyway. What did he care about how he intentionally hurt the only two people he cared about? And when he was waiting in the hospital, where his sister took her last few breaths, the only person who didn't rush there was his dad. Toby stood by the window and looked out into the street. He could have sworn he saw things out of the corner of his eye, but quickly blamed it on the medication he'd been put on. When dinner time had come around and his mother called up to him, Toby came down the stairs and hesitantly sat down at the table across from his father, and between his mother and an empty chair. It was quiet as his parents picked up their food, but Toby refused to eat. Instead, he just watched his dad with a blank stare. Coda, shut the fuck up about your Roblox. His mother caught onto his stare towards his father and elbowed him slightly. Toby looked over at Toby looked over at her slightly and looked down at his uneaten food, in which he didn't touch. Toby laid in bed. He pulled his covers over his head and stared at the window. He was tired, but there was no way he would fall asleep. He couldn't. There was too much to think about. He'd been debating on whether or not to follow his mother's directions and forgive his father, or continue holding a tight grudge with his boiling hatred. He heard his door creak open, and his mother padded into the room and sat on the bed next to him. She reached over and rubbed his neck, which had been turned to her. I know it's hard, Toby. Trust me. I understand, but I promise you it will get better, she said softly. When is he going to leave, Mom? Toby said with an innocent tone in his shaky voice. Connie let her gaze fall down to her feet. I don't know, honey. He's staying as far as I know, she replied. Toby didn't respond. He just continued to look forward at the wall, holding his damaged arm near his chest. After a few minutes of silence, his mother sighed before she leaned in to kiss his cheek and stood up to walk out of the room. Good night, she said as she closed the door.
The hours passed.
The hours passed slowly.
Oh, okay.
No, go ahead. No, I read enough.
Okay. The hours passed slowly, and Toby couldn't quit tossing and turning. Every time he let his imagination take over, he heard the screeching of tires, screaming of his sister, and he could barely uncontrollably shirk. What am I speaking today? He heard the screeching of tires, the screaming of his sister, and he could uncontrollably jerk in bed. He threw off his covers, lying in his back. Why can't I talk? Lying on his back, he pulled his pillow over his face and cried into it. He could feel his chest rise and fall as he let out each shaky breath. As he cried, he could hear his own pitiful weeping. He would have been screaming and crying if he pressed his pillow over his face. After a few seconds, he threw the pillow off his face and swelled and sat up, hunched over, holding his head and breathing roughly. Tears streaming from his eyes. He couldn't help but cry. He tried to keep it in, but he couldn't help but whine and whimper as he sat there shaking. He inhaled before he stood up and walked around his bed to the window and peered out, taking a deep breaths, trying to calm down. He rubbed his eyes and looked out the group of tall pine trees across the street. He stopped suddenly, and his gaze slowly centers on something standing under the streetlight. He heard ringing in his ears, but he couldn't look away. This figure stood beside the streetlight, about 2 feet shorter than it. Long arms draped at its side, and stared up at him with non-existent eyes. The figure had no features whatsoever, no eyes, no mouth, no nose. Yet it held Toby's hypnotized stare. whatsoever. No eyes, no. Oh, wait. The ringing in his ears grew louder and louder each second. He stared before suddenly it all went black. Next morning, Toby woke up in his bed. He felt different. He wasn't tired at all. When he consciously woke up, it felt like he had been lying there, awake for hours. He had no thoughts flowing through his mind. He sat up slowly and stumbled over to the wall. But when he stood up, he automatically felt dizzy. He stumbled to the doorway, but but when he's but when he stood up, he automatically felt dizzy. He stumbled to the doorway and walked down the stairs. His parents were sitting there at the table. His father was tuned in with the small TV that sat on the countertop. His mother was reading the newspaper. She quickly looked over when she felt Toby's presence looming behind her. Well, good morning, sleepyhead. You've been sleeping forever, she greeted him with a hesitating smile. Go ahead.
Alright, let me get back to where you are. Hesitated smile. Alright, I think I know where you are.
Mm-hmm.
Toby slowly looked over at the clock and noticed that it was 12:30 p.m. I made you breakfast, but it got cold. I was going to wake you, but I thought you needed your sleep. Her expression fell from happy to worried as her son resisted responding to her. You alright? Toby stumbled over and sat by his father. He felt as if he was on idle and had no control over his actions. He was seeing everything he did, but it didn't seem to register in his brain. He reached out to his father's arm, but his hand ended up getting slapped. His father turned to him abruptly and pushed his chair over with his foot. Don't touch me, boy, he yelled. His mother stood up. All right, knock that off. That's the last thing we need. The days went by, and things continued on as they were. Connie spent most of her time cleaning up the house, and her rude husband spent most of his time ordering her around. It was just how it used to be before the crash. Toby never really left his room. He would sit by his bed and tremble. His mind would wander. His thoughts changed too fast to remember. He would pace around his small room like a caged animal, or stare out the window. The unhealthy cycle continued. Connie continued to be pushed around by her husband, being way too submissive to him, and Toby remained in his room. Before he could think twice, he'd chew on his hands, tearing the flesh from his fingers. He would gnaw his hands until they bled. When his mother walked in on him when he was doing so, she reacted so horribly. She rushed him downstairs and grabbed the first aid, wrapping his hands in it. She demanded that he wouldn't leave her from his side. He isolated him so much that he grew to hate being around He began to hate being around others. His memory grew.
That was actually hilarious, dude, because as soon as you messed up, the music had stopped.
You really?
Yeah, the music stopped, and as soon as you messed up, it lagged for a second, then it stopped. So it was like if you messed up the entire thing.
It just paused just for me to cut that out. Where was I?
What?
Getting back into voice. He'd start missing memory of minutes, hours, days, and so on. He would begin talking nonsense about things completely unrelated to conversations he was having. He'd go off about seeing things, like sharks in the sink, as he washed dishes, hearing crickets in his pillows, and seeing ghosts outside his bedroom window. All of the nonsense landed him in a counselor's office. His mother grew too anxious about his mental health. She decided it would be good for him to talk to a professional about what he was feeling. Dude, this thing is so long.
Mm-hmm.
Mrs. Rogers? The lady asked. Yes, that's me, Connie nodded. We're here to see Dr. Oliver. I'm here with Toby Rogers. Yes, right this way. The lady stood up and led them down a long hallway. Toby looked at the framed artwork down the halls and turned it to the sound, the lady's high heels on the hardwood floor. She opened the door to a room with a table and 2 chairs. If we can get him to sit in here for a while, said the doctor. Oh, wait, no. We can get him to sit in here for a few minutes. I'll get the doctor. She smiled and held the door open. Toby stumbled into the room and sat down at the table. He looked over at his mother and the lady before the door slowly shut behind them. He looked around the room before he held up his tightly bandaged hands and began to bite at the bandages to unwrap his hands. But he was interrupted as the door swung open, and a young woman in a black and white spotted dress and light blonde hair stepped in, holding a board and a ballpoint pen.
Alright, I'll read. Hold on a second, just give me a second.
Okay. You should read until you get to like a quarter of the page left, and then I'll finish it off.
Alright. Toby? She asked with a smile. Toby looked at her and nodded. Nice to meet you, Toby. My name is Dr. Oliver. She put her hand out for him to shake, but hesitantly pulled away when she noticed his bandaged hands. Oh. She smiled nervously before clearing her throat and sitting in the chair across the table from him. So, I'm going to ask you a few questions. Try to answer them as honestly as possible, okay? She placed her clipboard down on the table. Toby nodded slowly and his hand... He inhaled and held his restrained hands in his lap. How old are you, Toby? 17. He responded quietly. She put that down on the paper that was clipped to the clipboard. What is your full name? Toby Aaron Rogers. What is your birthday? April 28th. Whoa, that's a day before mine. Who is your immediate family? Toby paused for a moment before answering her question. My mom, my dad, and he stopped. My sister. I heard about... Dakota just ruined that! I heard about your sister, dear. I'm really sorry. Her expression faded into a sad, pity-filled look. Toby nodded. Do you remember anything from the crash, Toby? Toby looked away from her. His mind went blank for a moment. He looked down on his lap. He heard a faint ringing sound. His eyes widened and he froze in place. Toby? The counselor asked. Toby, are you listening? Toby felt a shiver go down his spine until he froze once again and slowly looked over at the little window through the door where he saw it. A dark, featureless figure peering at him. He stared, eyes widened, the ringing grew louder and louder until suddenly the loud voice kind of broke his trance. Toby! She yelled. Toby jumped and fell sideways out of his chair and broke up and backed up at the corner into the corner. Dr. Oliver stood up, holding her clipboard to her chest, a surprised look in her eyes. Give me a second. Toby twitched. Toby met her eyes again, his breathing hitching as he twitched. That night, Toby lay in bed, his eyes dazed as he stared straight up to the ceiling. He could feel himself beginning to doze off when he heard the scattering of footsteps down his hallway. He sat up and looked towards the doorway, the door wide open. There was no light. Everything was lit by the luminescent blue glow of the moon through his window, leaving a cold lighting. He stood up and slowly made his way towards the doorway, when suddenly the door, which was previously wide open, slammed in his face. He gasped and fell back. His was out of breath.
Yeah, these people were really good at writing this.
Yeah. When he hit the ground and he began breathing heavily, his eyes wide open, he waited a few seconds before getting back up onto his feet. He reached out and grasped the cold door handle with his bandaged hand and creaked it open. He looked out into the hallway and tiptoed out of his room. The window at the end of the hallway lit up darkness with the blue moonlight as he patted his way down. He could hear small feet, which sounded like a child had run in front of him, giggling and running down the hallway. The hallway was a lot longer than he had remembered. It would seem endless, the ride home from the hospital. He heard a door creak in front of him. Mom? He called out in a shaky voice. Okay, so, you read 2 paragraphs, and then I'll read the rest, okay?
Alright. Where were you now? You were at...
Suddenly a door slammed.
Alright.
Suddenly, a door slammed behind him, and he jumped and turned around. Behind him, he heard a long, eerie groan from behind him that sounded to croak in his ears. He turned around as fast as he could and was suddenly face to face with none other than his dead sister. His eyes were clouded white, her skin pale, and the right side of her jaw only dangling on by tissue and muscles, glass protruding from her forehead, and black blood leaking down her face. Her blonde hair pulled up into a ponytail, as it always was, wearing a gray t-shirt and athlete shorts, which were dirty and spotted with blood. Her legs were bent in ways they shouldn't be. She stood, making a long croaking noise, only an inch from Toby's face. Toby yelped and fell back. Started to crawl backwards away from her, not able to break the eye contact he held with her blank, dead eyes. He dragged himself backwards until he backed up into something. He stopped for a second. Everything was dead silent except for his heavy breathing and crying. He slowly looked up to meet the blank face of a tall, dark figure that stood behind him. Behind the tall, dark mask were rows of children looking to range from 3 to 10 years old. Their eyes completely black, and dark black blood leaked from their eye sockets. He screamed and stood up as fast as he could, only to be tripped by dark black tendrils that wrapped around his ankles. He fell straight on his stomach and got the wind knocked out of his chest. He tried to scream out, but he couldn't make a sound. He eased out before it all went black.
I got this. I'll read the next thing.
It said Toby woke up at the start.
Okay. Let me look for it. Okay. Toby woke up with a start. He screamed out and sat up as fast as he could. Completely short of breath. He wheezed out and held his chest with his bandaged hands. It was just a dream. Just a dream. He laid back down and rolled on his bed and rolled over to the side. It felt like a giant weight had been lifted off his chest as he took deep breaths. He stood up and padded over to his window. He saw nothing. Nobody was out there. No ghosts, no figures, nothing. He heard the rustling and coughing of his father out the doorway. His door was closed. He walked over and opened it, looking out into the hallway once again.
Shut up.
He padded down the hallway into the kitchen where he found his dad standing, having a smoke in their living room. Toby waited a second and watched him from around the corner before a burning feeling started deep in his chest. Deep, boiling anger took over him. He heard the little imaginary voices in his head. Do it! Do it! Do it! Just do it! He chanted. He turned away and held his arm. He felt like he actually had control over himself, unlike he did for the past few weeks since he got home from the hospital. He actually had complete thoughts for just moments before they were clouded by a chanting of little voices in his head. Kill him! He wasn't there! He wasn't there! Kill him! Kill him! Just do it! It continued on. Toby trembled. No, he wasn't gonna do it. What was he going crazy? No, he won't kill anyone. He can't. He hated his father, but hated no way was he going to kill him. Okay, that was it. The last thought he had before he fell into an idle state once again. The influences of the voice in his head was way too much. He began to silently walk up behind his father. He reached over the counter to the knife holder in the kitchen and pulled out the largest knife he had been resting in the case. He gripped it in his hand. He felt the sensation take over his chest. He let out a snicker. He began laughing so hard he had to gasp for breath. His father turned around abruptly before he felt the force shoved him to the floor. He grunted as the hair was knocked out of him.
Yeah, I know. This person's really great.
As the air was knocked out of him. What? What? He looked up at the boy who stood over him, grasping the kitchen knife in his hand. Toby, what are you doing? He went to sit up and put his hand arms, and put his arms out in front of him in self-defense. But before he knew it, Toby was on top of him. He went to grab at his neck, but his father reached out and blocked his hand by grabbing onto his wrist. Stop! Get off of me, you little $13,000 fart face!
Yeah, okay.
You little fricker! He yelled at him.
Could have asked me to say it. I could have said it. It'd be like, big redneck voice. Get off of me, you little fucker. Wow. Okay. That was not the response I was expecting.
I know. He yelled, and with his other hand, he threw an off-center punch towards Toby's shoulder, but he didn't stop. The look in Toby's eyes was not changed. It was as if the demon had taken control over him. He looked back and went to stab the knife into his father's chest, but he blocked it and grabbed onto his wrist once again. He went to shove him back, but Toby kicked out of his feet in front of him and landed a hard blow straight to his face. His father recoiled and pulled his arm blade to cut his face. Toby got back up and drove the knife straight into his shoulder. His father let out a loud cry and went to pull the knife out. Before he could, Toby threw his fist straight into his face. He began to pound his fists into his head, laughing and wheezing. He cracked his neck and grabbed the knife and ripped it off of his shoulder. He drove it deep into his dad's chest, repeatedly stabbing his torso, blood spilling out and getting splattered everywhere. He didn't stop until his father's body went still. He threw the knife over to the side and leaned over, his body coughing and panting. He stared at his smashed-in face and sat there twitching, so a loud scream broke the silence. He looked over to see his mother standing a few feet away, covering her mouth, tears streaming down her eyes. "Toby!" she screamed. "Why did you do that?" she cried. "Why?" he screamed. "Why?" Toby stood up and began to back away from his father's bloody corpse. He began to back out of the kitchen. He looked down at the blood-soaked bandages on the hands and looked up at his mother one last time before he turned and ran out of the house. He ran into the garage and slammed his garage door before he ran out of his father's 2 hatchets that had been hanging on the tool rack above the table full of jars, filled to the brim with old rusted nails and screws. One of the hatchets was new. It had a bright orange handle and a shiny blade. The other one was old with a wooden handle and an old dull blade. He grabbed both and looked down at the table, and his eyes met with a box of matches. And under the table was a red gasoline tank. He held both of the hatchets in one hand and grabbed the matches and gasoline before running out of the garage, down the driveway and up the street. As he approached the streetlight that he could see out of his own bedroom window when he heard police sirens in the distance. He turned around and the red and blue flashing lights came rushing down the street. Toby stood for a second before he pulled the cap on the gasoline tank and ran down the street, spilling gasoline all over the street after him and turned to run into the trees. He poured the last bit of gasoline out before he had reached in his pockets and pulled out a match. He struck it against the box and immediately dropped it. In an instant, flames burst out around him. Fire caught onto the trees and bushes around him, and before he knew it, he was surrounded by fire. Silhouettes of police cars were visible through the flames as he backed away into the forest around him. He looked around, but his vision was blurred. His heart was pounding and he closed his eyes for a moment. This was it. That was the end. Toby felt a hand on his shoulder. He opened his eyes and looked over to see a large white hand with long bony fingers that rested on his shoulder. He followed the arm that was attached to the hand up to a towering dark figure. It appeared to be wearing a dark black suit, and its face was completely blank. It towered over Toby's small frame, and it looked down on him. Tendrils reached out from its back. Before Toby knew it, his vision blurred, and he was surrounded by the sound of ringing in his ears. Everything went blank. That was it. That was the end. That's how Toby Rogers died. A few weeks later, Connie sat in her sister's kitchen. Her sister Lori sat next to her drinking a cup of coffee. About 3 weeks ago, Connie had lost her husband and her son, and a few weeks before, she had lost her Dottie lost her daughter to a car crash. Since then, she moved in with her sister. The police were keeping her busy. They had just finished cleaning up the case, and the story had been released 2 weeks ago, when the focus of the world seemed to have shifted to completely new stories. Lori switched on the TV to a news broadcast. On the TV, the news reporter began introducing the new headline. "We have breaking news! Last night there has been a reported murder of 4 individuals. There were no suspects yet, but the victims were a group of middle school kids who had been out in the woods late last night. The kids had been bludgeoned and stabbed to death. The investigators had discovered a weapon at the crime scene, which appears to be an old dull-bladed hatchet, as you can see here. picture changed to snap up the shots of the weapon exactly as it was left on the crime scene. Investigator had pulled the name of the possible suspect, Toby Rogers, a 17-year-old boy who a few weeks ago stabbed his father to death and tried to cover up his escape by setting a fire in the streets in the forest area around the neighborhood. Although they had believed the young boy had died in a fire, investigators suspect that Toby Rogers may still be alive due to the fact that his body was never found. And that was it!
It wasn't bad, actually. I feel like kind of like I mean, it seemed weird to build off of the story of Slender, but the fact that it was something else that happened and sort of related to this in a way, like it's sort of like in a world where creepypastas are real and like what would and could happen.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't really built bad. I think it was a bit long, though. Okay, Mom. I mean, it was a little cliche. It wasn't horrible, though. I mean, the only thing I can really complain about it is the length. But then again, it's kind of got to be decent enough to be able to fit the story in there. It's not that bad of a thing there.
Mama Kitty back there?
I mean, the length. I mean, I can see the length is fine because it's building up backstory with the length that it had.
I've just never really done one at that length before. I'm normally used to shorter ones, if
Yeah,
any.
like Jeff the Killer and like Mothman.
Oh, I like
Strider.
Mothman and Squidward Suicide, bro.
Strider.
Classics.
Yeah, Strider is one of the shorter ones too. I think it's only about like a few paragraphs long. But yeah, so the gameplay for this will probably be posted on my friend Commander Raccoon's channel. Don't know what game he's gonna be playing, but it will be posted there. So I'll give you a link to his account when the video goes up, and I'll also give you the link to Aiden's account, which you can go check out and subscribe to and stuff, and watch his videos.
Actually, I literally, right before we started recording, since they were all so laggy and my mic was getting really shit, I just like deleted all of them. And I mean, I've had some problems with my mic where people can't hear me for some reason. I thought I was a loud person. Maybe my mic's not very loud, I don't know. You can tell me that. But I just deleted them because they were so laggy. I'll put up more. I mean, if you want to put it there just for future reference, you can. But at the time of this video coming out, there is nothing to really see there.
Oh, okay. So I guess that was it. That was the story of Tiki Toby. By Castaway. Reposted by Crimson Chaos 13. I'll leave a link in the description of this. Go check it out. You may need an account. I'm not sure.
To finish the whole thing, yeah. You gotta just make a count. It literally takes 3 seconds though.
Yeah, okay. So, that's that.
It's not a hack, I promise.
I'll see you guys in the next. Oh, wait. Before I mention, I want some suggestions for other creepypastas that I should read. Now, this is just one to start off, just to introduce it. And yeah. Like, comment, share, subscribe, do whatever. And thank you for watching. I'm part of the red team today. And goodbye.